Having lived in the West, I am no stranger to waiting an exorbitant amount of time for a Japanese title to finally reach my shore. That's not to mention that we often had to contend with cut content due to the long development cycle involved with translation and interpretation, and this is without even touching on the territory of censorship. Sadly, White Knight Chronicles is a prime example of such cuts and delays. When I first heard of the game, I was so excited because it was made by Level 5, the studio who brought us Dark Cloud, Dark Chronicle, and later Ni no Kuni. Released for the Sony PlayStation 3 in Japan in late 2008, it wasn't ported across the sea until early 2010, over 1 year later. I only played it recently because I didn't own a PlayStation 3 at the time, and sadly as a result, I missed out on a major aspect of the game, an online feature that was integral to trophy progression, but I'll speak more on that later. We begin the game by creating our own avatar in a similar fashion to Western RPGs like Dragon Age or Mass Effect. Surprisingly, the customization options are quite in-depth, and you have a large number of sliders available to you to make the character resemble yourself. After choosing my optimal look, I was ready to dive in and see all the story had to offer my carefully curated hero. In typical RPG fashion, we begin the game as a lowly worker of a local wine stocker who is tasked with delivering wine to the princess's coming-of-age ceremony. We are joined by fellow porter Leonard and are asked by our boss to head to a nearby village to accompany the shipment directly to the castle. Of course, not everything in life is simple and straightforward, and after a few hiccups, we discover that solving these mishaps has caused night to fall. Undeterred, Leonard insists that the wine is still necessary for the party, and together we convince the guards of the castle to let us in. Wait a second. Hold up. Ideally, that's how the situation would play out, but we don't really do anything. All we do is just stand there with a perpetual awkward look on our face. You'd better become used to this, as it becomes a common theme throughout the game. You'll quickly find that, unlike Dragon Age or Mass Effect, your carefully curated character has absolutely no direct impact on the story in any capacity whatsoever. Within the castle walls, we deliver the wine as intended, overstaying our welcome by partaking in the frivolity. It seems to be a job well done, and no one cares that we are unwelcome guests. The end. But suddenly, the castle comes under attack. Separated from Leonard, our avatar is left to fend for himself, as we are forced to take control of the game's true protagonist in his first of many attempts to protect Princess Cisna. The two decide to flee by descending into the castle basement, whilst parts of the building burn and collapse around them. Great idea, for we all know how well that went for Cersei and Jaime Lannister. Deep within the basement of the castle, Leonard and Cisna discover a large suit of armor, an Incorruptus, detained in chains. With little time to think, as enemy forces are in close pursuit, Leonard picks up an artifact, against advice not to, and joins with the armor to become its pact maker. Using the large armor, he defeats the abomination, but loses the princess in the process, thus setting the motive for our grand adventure. In order to pursue the captured princess, Leonard and his companions must travel on foot, yet another wonderful idea. The territories that the party traverse are fraught with danger, so you'll become well accustomed to the battle system, as it's a necessity of survival. If I were to compare it to existing systems, it could be best described as the love child of Secret of Mana and Final Fantasy XI, with an added artificial insemination of Xenogears. You have the visual representation of when you can attack, similar to the percentage counter for an optimal attack in Secret of Mana, with all the clunky, intrusive UI interfaces and menu systems of Final Fantasy XI. Throw in gigantic mechs and congratulations, it's a White Knight Chronicles! Whilst traversing the fields, caverns, caves, and other destitute places of the world, you'll run into an assortment of monsters, more a handful that are palette-swapped forms of each other, and engage in combat on the field directly. Enemies come in two varieties, normal and fuck off, that's way too big. I insist on the profanity because every time you are cornered by one of them, the camera decides that it wants to take a closer look inside of your Incorruptus, rather than allowing you to see your target. I mean, I didn't ask for a biology lesson, but sure, The first thing you'll notice, besides around 70% of screen real estate being taken up by clunky UI menus that you have no way of resizing, is that you can only attack when the gorge on the bottom right has completed a full rotation. As you can imagine, this makes battles rather sluggish. When you are able to attack, you can select a skill from the bottom command list. These skills can be set as you wish before you enter combat. Skills have different types, for example piercing or thrust. Some skills also take AP chips to cast. AP is also tied to whether a character can suit up in an Incorruptus, so it's best to not use any of your AP with your Pact Makers if you can avoid it. The bar does charge through taking damage and killing enemies, however. Speaking of Pact Makers, they are those of your party that have access to an Incorruptus. Mid-battle, if the icon in the bottom left of the screen has a glow to it, you can use the Transform command. By doing this, the character's skill bar is replaced by moves unique to that Incorruptus and the equipment that you have given it. These skills are really powerful, and because you can't just transform willy-nilly whenever you like, are best saved for when you encounter really big foes or bosses. It's advised that you always travel with a Pact Maker in your party, lest you get surprised by a boss battle that you may not be able to win otherwise. Though be careful, as Incorruptus skills can cost a ton of MP to use, and once your MP reaches 0, you'll be a measly human futsal ball, endlessly tossed about by raging giant tantrums. Your team members are controlled by the AI, and most of the time they are good team players, working with you to attack enemies and keep you hale and healthy. If you feel like they aren't performing well, you may choose to switch them and control them directly, though you can always only control one character at a time. I mentioned that most of the time they are good, because even though they are able to operate solidly within a battle, it seems that a closing door is an insurmountable challenge that they just don't seem to be able to overcome. As you win battles, you will gain experience, which will level your characters. As they level, they will gain skill points that can be distributed in their skill trees. All characters, with a few exceptions, have access to all weapon and magical abilities, so how you develop your characters is up to you. Note that you can only use a skill if you have that skill's weapon equipped. This is not the case for magic abilities, which can be used freely. Additionally, all skill trees have permanent stat increases that can be unlocked, so it is well worth your time to invest in other weapon types, even if you never plan to have a character wield that weapon. One thing I really appreciated about this game was that every weapon and piece of equipment appeared uniquely on your character, so you could pick and choose what you wanted them to wear, and this persisted even into cutscenes. Not many JRPGs tended to do this back in the day when White Knight Chronicles first came out, so I thought it was refreshing to see. Equipment can be found in treasure chests across the world, bought at stores, or bound. Binding isn't available from the beginning of the game, but when it unlocks, it pays to bind new weapons and armor in order to become stronger. Additionally, weapons and armor can be enhanced using special pearls at the equipment store. Some item bindings require enhanced equipment, so it pays to do both. Enhancements and binding both require prerequisite items that can generally be found in the field. If you happen upon a glittering rock face, tree, or a butterfly fluttering around some grass, make sure to collect any materials that you can, as many of these are necessary for improving your characters and your hometown, which I'll speak more on later. Whilst we're on the topic of equipment and items, I should note that each character can only carry 20 pieces of equipment, and items that are equipped are included in this count. It's almost as though level 5 decided to imitate the original Suikoden in this regard. You do have an item storage, but you cannot send things to it unless you're at a save point or in a town, so be careful to make sure you manage your inventory before heading out into hostile lands. Characters can also only equip an item if they are holding it, meaning that sometimes it becomes necessary to juggle through the clunky menus in order to transfer and equip items between your characters. One thing I do want to mention about the story is that sometimes it seems a little lacking. Without giving anything away, things happen or don't happen and seem like a strange oversight by the developers. However, I can assure you that if you persist through the narrative, these holes are explained. Also, again I must take a moment to bemoan the lack of interaction that our avatar has with the main party. Only a few times in the game do other characters even acknowledge their existence, which I found to be quite a shame and a waste. I guess when one gains the ability to use a powerful suit of armor, he doesn't need his best friend anymore. In fact, the only time your avatar is useful is in the previously mentioned online mode. Unfortunately, the servers for the game was switched off in 2013. And whilst you can still access portions of this mode, you don't have access to the online functionality. For starters, of what you can access, your avatar can use Georama to create their own village, resembling the system found in Dark Cloud. They can also undertake additional quests that are unrelated to the main story. These quests used to be able to be completed with other players online, but now they can only be done solo, meaning that they are far more difficult than they need to be. You can't even take your own in-game allies with you, which makes it even more difficult to contend with. As a huge fan of the Georama mode of Dark Cloud, I did appreciate the ability to build my own town. However, the construction area at first is extremely limited, and some of the functionality to upgrading this is gated behind your guild rank, which can only be raised by taking part in the additional online quests. Doing them alone is so time consuming and boring that I completely forwent doing more than one, and my town was forever stuck at a low rank without being able to expand further. You can also recruit citizens to your town from the various inhabited places across the world, but they don't actually move to your town, rather staying where you recruited them. I thought this was a little silly. I mean, if they can teleport instantly to your town when you visit it, and back to their hometown when you leave, then why did I have to walk everywhere on foot? The graphics are suitable for a PS3 title, and as I mentioned before, I appreciated that equipment was uniquely modelled to your characters, although some chest pieces made my male characters look like their chests were heavily endowed. The environments are expansive, if sometimes a little bare, with few landmarks, though I did like the little details like falling leaves or blowing sand. On the other hand, the CGI cutscenes that pepper the game are phenomenal. I enjoyed that they captured moments that the in-game engine wouldn't have been able to give as much justice to. The enemy designs are interesting, although sometimes repetitive. I did like the design of some of the bigger enemies in the game, almost drawing a comparison to some enemies found within Zelda Twilight Princess, especially with how some of the enemies were introduced with a title plate. The music of the game is varied and fits well with the atmosphere of the different locations. In the earlier stages of the game, areas have the flair of a Renaissance fair, with the nostalgic feel of Dark Cloud music. Battle themes are sufficiently engaging, though I would have liked a different normal battle theme later in the game. My favourite track is called Flandale Range. The instruments and composition reminded me a little of the theme of Narune Village from Dark Cloud. The voice acting was also rather appropriate, with ambient dialogue occurring between characters as they journeyed, though sometimes this dialogue did have a tendency to repeat itself.
Feels like we're finally getting to the heart of things.
White Knight Chronicles was an ambitious attempt at a first level 5 studio JRPG for the Sony PlayStation 3. While some of the ideas were great and hit the mark, others felt generic and left the story lacking. The characters have interesting personalities and some have strange reasons for joining the party, but overall the way the story was told sometimes left me confused. Whilst the battle system was initially interesting, after putting time into it, it felt slow and clunky and not at all satisfactory. The lack of online features due to the servers being shut down also hurt the polish of this game. Whilst I can say that I enjoyed my experience on my initial playthrough, I don't want to play it again, though I will be interested to check out the sequel. By the way, are there any games that you had to wait a long time for and were disappointed overall by when you finally were able to play them? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch my video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe as it helps me out a bunch. Until next time, take care of yourselves and I'll see you all next time.